My parents tried to force their favorite child to live in my apartment, so I planned for a stranger to decide whether they deserved to stay there. I'm Victoria Hammond, 30 years old, living alone in a 6th-floor apartment in Midtown Nashville, where morning light filters through the big glass windows, and I can hear someone playing piano in the unit below every weekend. It took me nearly 6 years to get to this point. No help from anyone, just extra shifts, instant noodles for dinner, and nights I passed out on my desk. And yet, in one single sentence, everything I'd worked so hard to build was toppled like a glass of red wine spilled across a white tablecloth. The Hammond family dinners happened like clockwork, the first Sunday of every month, in a cream-colored 2-story home in Franklin, where my parents had lived for 35 years. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. It was a small act of resistance I allowed myself, a silent protest that I wasn't the obedient daughter who nodded at everything anymore. My father, Edward, opened the door and gave me a limp hug like it was a formality. My mother, Linda, was bustling in the kitchen with her signature roast, while my younger sister, Sophie, was already sunk into the sofa, scrolling on her phone like nobody else existed. She's 27, beautiful, charming, and always arrives at family events with a fresh crisis. She was heartbroken over a fiancé she'd known for less than a year. "Victoria, take a seat. I just reheated the roast," she said without looking up. I nodded and walked into the dining room. Fresh tablecloth, glasses lined up perfectly. It all looked staged, like a play, and I had a feeling tonight's script had already been written. We'd been eating for about 20 minutes when my father set down his utensils and cleared his throat, the unspoken family signal that something was about to be announced, and it was rarely something I wanted to hear. "Sophie needs a temporary place to stay," he began in the same tone he used when reading the stock report. "We talked it over. She'll be moving into your apartment for a while." I nearly stabbed my own hand with my fork. "Excuse me." I slowly set my glass down. "My apartment?" "Yes, it has 2 bedrooms, my mother added, pouring more wine for my dad. "And you're always traveling for work. That office of yours is going to waste." "No one thought to ask me," I asked, trying to keep my tone even, though my throat was beginning to burn. Sophie looked up and gave a smirking smile. "I just need a few months, just until I get my life sorted out. It's cramped at Mom and Dad's, and your place is perfect. It makes total sense." She said it makes sense like she was pitching a campaign strategy, not invading someone's personal life. I let out a thin, humorless laugh. If I could have seen my reflection, I think I would have looked cracked. "My office isn't for rent, and I don't recall agreeing to any of this." My father sighed. My mother opened her calendar. "We'll move Sophie in next Saturday. Your dad borrowed Uncle Frank's truck. We'll set up the queen bed from the garage in her room." It felt like watching a movie I didn't audition for. Everything was already cast, rehearsed, and staged, except the lead character. The one who actually owned the apartment hadn't even been asked. I set my utensils down. "I don't agree to this, Victoria," my mother said in a low voice. "This is family. Families help each other." "Oh, then why not let Sophie sleep in your living room, or stay in Aunt Carol's basement apartment, or rent her own place like I did 10 years ago when you told me to grow up and be independent?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Sophie scoffed, leaning back in her chair. "Wow, you'd have to be so dramatic." I glanced at her, then at my parents. "This is the apartment I bought with my own money. It's not a guest house. It's not shared property." "You're overreacting," my father muttered. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's only temporary." I stood, pushing my chair back. Temporary is still a violation when it's done without consent. No one answered. I didn't need them to. The message was crystal clear. I was the only one in that house grounded in reality. They still saw me as an extension of the family unit, silent, manageable, endlessly available. But tonight, I wasn't her anymore. I drove away in silence, just the wind slicing through a cracked window, a weight pressed against my chest, cold and heavy like stone. No one had kicked me out, but I didn't need permission to leave. I'd long been familiar with that quiet kind of exile. Growing up, my role in the Hammond household was always clear. The middle daughter, the responsible one, the girl who never caused trouble. No one had to say it. I was expected to stay quiet, stay helpful, stay out of the way. I patched my own clothes in middle school, filled out scholarship forms on my own, called job hotlines after my allowance was cut because I was too old to expect handouts. My sister Vanessa, now 34, was the painting that hung in the center of the living room. She studied interior design, changed majors 3 times, took a year off to find creative clarity, and still got a graduation party at a resort near Charleston. I remember standing backstage at that event, checking the microphones and pinning up photo collages. Vanessa just had to smile. Everything else, leave it to Victoria. Now she lives in Austin in a 2-bedroom condo my parents bought in their name. Her work is erratic. Boyfriends come and go, but each time she stumbles, the family rushes in like she's a fallen Olympian. When she pulled from Mom's retirement account to start a creative studio, Mom just sighed and cooked her a special dinner because baby girl is under so much stress. Then there's my brother Troy, 24, still hasn't finished college despite switching schools 3 times. Every failure is a learning moment. Every mistake is part of growing up. Last year, he failed a class because he forgot the deadline. And Dad still wired him money to help get his head straight. I'm not resentful. Not anymore. But every time I'm asked to hand over control of my own space, like my apartment, it's hard not to feel like I'm just another piece of shared furniture in the Hammond household. I remember when I had pneumonia and had to stay in the hospital for 2 nights. I called Mom to let her know, and her response was flat. Okay, drink some soup. I'm busy helping Vanessa. She just broke up with that boyfriend. The car stopped at a red light. I exhaled as if finally letting go of something that had been stuck in my throat all evening. Ahead, the skyline shimmered with high-rising buildings. The city remained alive, even as my heart felt like a map creased and wrinkled beyond recognition. I turned my head to look at the building where my apartment quietly waited. No one had asked if I was okay with Sophie moving in. No permission, just an announcement. And honestly, it didn't surprise me. To them, I was the one who always made room, who nodded even when it tore me apart inside. I parked in the garage, took the elevator up, and unlocked the door with my fingerprint, the one I had changed a month ago after discovering that Mom had helpfully cleaned while I was out of town. Inside was calm, welcome silence. I turned on the lights, walked past the living room, fingers brushing the edge of the soft gray sofa, then paused in the kitchen doorway, right where I had hung a framed photo I took on a solo hike in Utah. No one in my family ever asked about that photo. No one ever asked why I chose to live alone, why I never brought anyone home to meet them, or what I had gone through to keep my current job, a management role at a renewable energy systems firm. I opened my laptop, launched the Notes app, and typed a single line. I am not obligated to carry others just because I'm not causing problems. On the left side of the screen was still the list of vacations I had declined to work overtime. I couldn't even remember how many birthdays, Thanksgivings, and Christmases I had missed to meet deadlines, while Vanessa went on retreats in Arizona sponsored by Mom and Troy threw poolside birthday parties with his self-discovery crew. Favoritism in my family wasn't loud. It arrived in drops like water seeping through walls, and by the time you noticed, the damage was already deep, stained, moldy, and nearly impossible to scrub out. I turned off the kitchen lights and stepped into my office, the extra room, as Mom called it. In here, I kept what I valued, a vision board for the environmental project I was doing with an NGO, my technical books, and little things that reminded me I was not someone's shadow. I sat down in my swivel chair, looked around the room. The thought of Sophie sleeping on a bed I assembled, scrolling through her phone under lights I chose, invading every corner I called home, made my stomach twist. Not because I hated her, but because I didn't want to sacrifice anymore. I opened my email, typed the subject line policy on temporary residence, and hit send to the building manager. If they still didn't see me as a whole, independent person, then it was time I started proving it, starting with the smallest things. I used to think endurance was a virtue, that if I were patient enough, soft enough, the people I loved would eventually understand. But over the past 25 years, the only thing I learned was in the Hammond household, silence wasn't strength, it was consent. When I was 14, in a summer so hot it felt like fire across Tennessee, my mother suddenly declared that I would be babysitting the twin toddlers of her cousin Denise, chaotic little hurricanes. Every morning I woke up at 6 to clean the house, cook breakfast for them, break up fights when one clawed at the other's face, and sit on guard while they napped, while my friends went swimming, took dance lessons, art classes, or skill camp. I wasn't asked, I was told. When I complained, my mother said, "You don't do much to help this family. Now's your chance. Denise is struggling. Don't you care about people?" That line, "don't you care about people," haunted me like a jab to the ribs every time I tried to say no. In college, I earned a full scholarship to the University of Minnesota. I was so overjoyed. I sobbed in the library bathroom when I got the letter. But 1 week later, Mom handed me a printed email from Aunt Sandra, a relative I could barely picture, asking if her daughter could stay with me while she interned in Nashville. My off-campus rental had an old bunk bed, one desk, and a broken chair I had propped up with books. Still, I was told to share for the sake of family. That year, I slept on the floor in a sleeping bag while Sandra's daughter took my bed, used my things, complained about my spaghetti, and brought her new boyfriend over for giggly midnight visits. I pushed back once. My mom called that very night, voice cold as ice. "Victoria, you're living off a scholarship and the goodwill of others. Don't let people think you're petty and selfish. It's just one short summer. Don't be dramatic." One summer, 3 months, 92 days of feeling like a guest in my own space, but they called it an opportunity to share. They called it family compassion. I learned how to be quiet, learned to wait for others to eat before serving myself, learned to nod through family meetings where I was never consulted, learned to shrink so Vanessa could shine and Troy could fall apart and still be caught. And then it became habit, like walking into a crowded room where every spotlight shines on someone else and convincing yourself to stand in the shadows because you've forgotten you deserve to step into the light too. This apartment is the first place I haven't had to share with anyone. Every corner was my decision. Every decoration bought with real savings. No handouts, no applause, no resistance. So when Mom said that office is just going to waste, my entire body clenched. Not because they didn't understand, but because they didn't care. To them, my space was still up for grabs, as long as the excuse sounded reasonable. I remembered when Troy shattered someone's car window playing ball in a parking lot. My parents apologized for him. When Vanessa lost her apartment deposit in Austin because she spent it on vintage furniture, everyone called it an unfortunate misstep. But when I refused to host a cousin for 2 weeks last year because I was leading a confidential project, Mom said I was unnecessarily cold. Every time I set a boundary, I was labeled heartless. Every time I said no, I was told I lacked compassion. Every time I chose myself, I was accused of betraying family values. When I vented to Katie, my best friend since high school, now a lawyer in Atlanta, she sighed so long it sounded like steam escaping a pipe. "Vic, your family doesn't see your interpersonal space as lines. They see them as unlocked doors. I used to believe that family is forever, but now I know only what is respected lasts. A house without walls or locks becomes a public rest stop, and a person without control over their own life will always live by someone else's script." I turned off the lights, pulled out my phone, opened notes, and typed. From now on, no one enters my space without knocking. When I walked into Dr. Hadley's office, it was lightly raining in Nashville. Not enough to soak a jacket, but enough to make you want to stay indoors. Her office was on the 3rd floor of an old building near Centennial Park with dark wood floors and abstract paintings on the walls. Not bland like a typical doctor's office, but not cozy enough to lower your guard either. "Victoria," her voice called out just as I shut the door. Firm, no hesitation. I nodded, sitting on the leather chair. It took me a few seconds to find a way to begin. Not because I didn't have anything to say, because I wasn't used to someone actually wanting to hear it. I had booked the appointment after Katie sent me the contact. Her message simply read, "Think of this as investing in yourself." I gave a brief summary about my family. Nothing long, just the essentials. When I got to the part about my parents deciding my sister would move into my apartment without asking me, Dr. Hadley set down her pen, leaned back and locked eyes with me. "And when you pushed back, what did they say?" I let out a dry laugh, that I was making a big deal, that I was being selfish. She nodded, not surprised. "Do you often use the word endure to describe how you live?" I said nothing. That question didn't need an answer. The answer lived in every choice I made to step back. Every dinner where I bit my tongue, every room I left so someone else could walk in. After that first session, I didn't feel enlightened or lighter. But on the way home, I drove slower. For the first time in weeks, I let the rain soak into my hair as I turned into my favorite coffee shop. No umbrella, no dodging. The next day, my mom called. I declined the call. A small action, but it tightened my chest like I was betraying someone. I placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter, made myself a cup of peppermint tea, and turned on a jazz playlist. On Thursday evening, I got an email from my dad. "Can you handle Thanksgiving prep like last year? Everyone's looking forward to your mashed potatoes." I stared at the line, my hand frozen on the mouse. Last year, I had worked 12-hour days the week before, then spent all of Wednesday night peeling potatoes, basting the turkey, and setting the table while everyone else drank wine and argued about politics in the living room. I typed out a reply slowly, clearly. I won't be hosting Thanksgiving this year. I need to rest and focus on myself. Hope everyone has a lovely gathering. No explanation, no apology, just a decision. The moment I hit send, my heart sped up. I placed a hand on my chest, feeling the thump against my palm. But unlike before, the anxious buzz didn't spiral. It felt like a necessary physical reaction, like the burn after climbing a long staircase. Your body aches, but your mind is clearer. My mom didn't call right away, but the next day, Vanessa texted, "Mom's really upset. I don't get what's going on with you anymore. You really can't help for just one day." I didn't reply. Katie came over Saturday night. When I told her what had happened, she sat on the rug holding a mug of cocoa, nodding slowly. "You're not changing," she said. "You're just returning to your actual size after shrinking yourself for 20 years to fit other people's expectations." I looked around my apartment, the soft yellow light on the walls, the bookshelf arranged in a color gradient that I did myself, the hand-woven rug from my Oregon trip. Nothing in the room had changed, but tonight it felt wider, like it was making room for a quiet I'd never dared to let in before. The following week, I arrived at Dr. Hadley's office on time. No reminders needed, no hesitation. "What made this week feel different for you?" she asked. I thought for a moment, then answered, "I said no, and I survived." She smiled gently, like someone hearing a sprout had finally reached sunlight. On the way home, I rolled down the window, letting the breeze rush in. City lights blinked like exclamation marks of change. I didn't know how far I'd go, but at least now I was the one driving. No longer riding shotgun in someone else's life. I sat in front of my laptop for nearly an hour rereading the lease agreement. The clause I was looking for was in Section 5.3 printed in fine text. Any long-term guest exceeding 14 consecutive days or 21 non-consecutive days within 6 months must have written consent from management. Below it was a warning. Violation may result in lease termination without notice. Cold language, but to me it was armor. Not to start a fight, but to protect myself from intrusions disguised as family obligations. I printed the lease, highlighted the key clauses. Then I emailed the building manager, May Whitaker, explaining I was considering a temporary guest during a 2-week work trip. I clearly stated this wasn't a full sublease, just a legal short-term arrangement, and I wanted to follow the proper protocol. Her response came the next morning. May approved, attaching a guest declaration form and requesting a copy of ID and a short-term addendum. Everything transparent, official, no room for family feelings to blur my control over my space. Only one problem left, finding the right person to stay. I thought of Ben from the engineering team. Nice guy, but messy. Lisa had a dog, not a fit. Then I remembered Mason, the project lead I'd worked with in Charlotte. He had just announced his apartment was undergoing plumbing repairs and he needed a place to crash for a few weeks. Everyone at work knew he'd been looking for a temporary solution. I texted Mason, "If you still need a short-term place, I have an apartment open for 2 weeks. Need someone to house it? Legal temp agreement can be arranged." Less than 20 minutes later, he called, voice steady, slightly relieved. "I really appreciate this. Should we meet in person?" "Yes, tonight at 6. I'll have the paperwork ready." The meeting went smoothly. Mason arrived on time, dressed neat, carrying a copy of his ID, and signed the draft agreement I had prepared. I explained the situation. The family boundary part was summarized as private issue requiring peace and discretion. He nodded, understanding. No questions asked. "You just need to keep the place as it is when I leave. No one gets in without a key. No need to explain if anyone knocks. Just say you're the authorized guest with a valid agreement. Not a problem." Mason smiled, placing a firm signature on the contract. I scanned the file, emailed it to May along with Mason's ID and a clear check-in-out schedule. Fully compliant, no loopholes left for any surprise. Family plans. Then I installed a small camera in the living room aimed at the front door. The device had motion alerts and live feed access through an app, not to monitor Mason. I trusted him, but to protect against those named Hammond who still believed they had default access to my life. 3 days later, her mom sent a text. "Your dad has rented the moving truck for Saturday. Sophie is picking out curtains. Get the room ready. No question mark. No. Would that be okay? I didn't reply. I just sent a single message to Mason. Family may show up unannounced. Stick to what we agreed. He responded with a got it emoji, adding, if needed, I've got strong coffee and an engineer's patience. Friday evening, I packed up anything valuable, camera, personal documents, a few small pieces of jewelry. I stored them temporarily in my company's locker, double-locked. Then I drove out to the coast and rented a small room near Rosemary Beach, where no one knew my name, and the waves hit hard enough to clear the static in my mind. Saturday morning when I turned on my phone, the camera had flagged 3 motion alerts. I opened the feed. The first clip showed my dad knocking on the door. Beside him, Mom held a large plastic bin. Behind them stood Sophie, arms crossed, oversized sunglasses in place. The second clip captured the door opening. Mason stood inside, white t-shirt, jeans, hair slightly tousled. He didn't step out. He said something that made my dad's eyes widen. My mom began pointing toward the door. Sophie stepped back and pulled out her phone to call someone. The last clip showed Mason holding up the signed agreement, pointing to the line with his name printed on it. A building security guard appeared. After a brief conversation, my family left. Their faces weren't fully visible on camera, but their stiff posture and the way Mom's hand clenched the purse strap said everything. I took a deep breath, saved the footage to my personal archive, and closed the app. The next morning, my phone lit up with unread notifications. 6 missed calls from Mom, 5 from Dad, a stream of messages from Sophie, each one long enough to pass for a short novel, only differing in tone. From gentle to sharp, Mom's first line, Victoria, you can't be serious with this. I feel completely betrayed. Followed by a photo of Sophie standing in front of the moving truck, face flushed with the caption, this is how you treat your sister. Dad's message was shorter but heavier. You're shaming the entire family. Call me immediately. I exhaled slowly, set the phone down on the hotel's granite counter, then stepped out onto the balcony. The sea air was cold, but far more bearable than the guilt-laced demands coming from my device. An hour later, I checked the apartment's security feed. Mason was in the living room reading a book, feet propped on the coffee table. Outside in the hallway, my parents had returned with the building manager. There was no audio, but Mom's expression didn't need sound. Her lips were tightly pressed, eyes squinting, hand gesturing repeatedly toward the door. Mason opened it halfway and presented the sublease contract. The manager skimmed a few lines and nodded. Linda turned around, pulled out her phone, and muttered something under her breath with tight-lipped resolve. As the footage ended, she was walking down the hallway, her fingers gripping her purse strap until they turned white. My phone rang. Sophie. I let it ring. 15 seconds. 20. When the screen finally went dark, I unlocked it and read her next message. I have nowhere to sleep tonight. Mom is crying. Dad is furious. I just need a little help. Is that really so hard to understand? No real question. Just a demand wrapped in hurt feelings. An hour later, my mom sent a 2-screen-length message that began with, do you remember when you had that fever at age 3, and I stayed up all night sponging you down? And ended with how you lock a stranger in your home just to throw your own blood family out. Dad's next message, your mother is exhausted from all this. If you have a shred of compassion left, you'll think hard before destroying what little family we have. I didn't reply. Instead, I texted Katie. Things are escalating. She called just minutes later, her voice calm, unsurprised. Let me guess. Emotional blackmail, guilt, and salvation demands. All of it. Like they're following a manipulator's handbook, word for word. I chuckled, though my throat felt tight. You feeling guilty? She asked it straight. Part of me does. I paused. Even though I know I'm right. It just feels like I threw my own family out. Victoria, you didn't throw anyone out. They were never invited in to begin with. That's an important distinction. I went quiet at that. My eyes drifted to the ocean where waves crashed with no concern for who might be watching. That afternoon, Sophie posted a photo on Instagram. She was sitting in a car, makeup flawless, but the caption read, thrown out while mourning a breakup. Thanks to the one who loves me most. 38 likes within an hour. 2 of her friends left sympathetic comments. 1 even tagged me in a reply. I didn't respond, just took a screenshot and sent it to Katie. They don't want truth. They want an audience. She replied, that night, Dad called 3 times. Mom sent a 3-minute-long voice message. I didn't open it. Sophie continued to post cryptic captions on Instagram about people who hide cruelty behind kindness. I muted notifications from all their accounts. Still watching, just not listening. They could speak all they wanted. I wasn't obligated to hear it anymore. As night settled in, I lay in the hotel room, the bedside lamp casting a soft glow on the ceiling. Silence. No buzzing from my phone. No half-truths dressed up as compromises. I closed my eyes without fear of anyone breaking the peace, not because my family had stopped pushing, but because I had finally stopped letting them in. I picked a small cafe in East Nashville, neutral ground, quiet enough not to raise voices, far enough from home that no one could claim it as familiar territory. I arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a cappuccino, and placed my phone face down on the table, a quiet signal to myself. Stay calm. Don't fall back into old roles. My parents arrived at the same time, carrying nothing but solemn expressions. Mom wore the blue wool coat I had once given her for her birthday. It now looked like it belonged to a stranger. Dad was dressed in his usual crisp suit, dark tie, walking with the urgency of someone heading into an important meeting. Sophie showed up a few minutes later holding a matcha drink, slowing down when she saw me. She wore no makeup, her hair was tied back neatly, and her eyes looked uncertain. Nothing like the polished version of herself she posted on Instagram. I didn't stand up, just nodded as they sat. No one spoke first. No hugs, not a single greeting. I waited one more breath before I began. I didn't invite everyone here to argue. I came to say things that should have been said a long time ago. My dad raised an eyebrow, arms crossed. My mom adjusted her scarf. Sophie stared at the table. The fact that you decided Sophie would move into my apartment without asking me crossed a line. It wasn't just disrespectful. It completely dismissed my right to choose. My mom frowned. You live alone. The apartment has a spare room. Sophie needed a place to stay. Isn't that reasonable? Reasonable to who? I kept my tone even. I wasn't asked. I was told. Like always. My dad cut in, his voice low but tight. You're blowing this out of proportion. This is a family matter, not a property dispute. I turned the coffee cup in my hands. Dad, family doesn't mean you get to walk into someone's life without knocking. I've allowed it for too long. I've said yes when asked to sacrifice, but no one ever stopped to ask whether I wanted to or not. Sophie shifted slightly, eyes downcast. I thought you agreed. Mom said you were busy, so you didn't have time to respond. I looked at her. Sophie, did you ever call to ask me directly, or did you just listen and believe? Because that was easier. Silence stretched for several seconds. My mom clenched her hands. We're pointing fingers instead of finding solutions. I think the best thing would be, Mom, I've been the solution since middle school. From babysitting cousins to giving up my bed to handling college finances on my own, while you two paid for the youngest to study film in LA, which he later dropped out of. I've never been seen as someone with limits. My dad's shoulders dropped. The wrinkle between his brows deepened. Maybe we got too used to you handling it. But that doesn't mean we meant to. I nodded slightly. The thing is, intentional or not, the hurt still exists, and I can't keep carrying the burden just because people assume I can. Sophie looked up, her gaze slower than when she'd first walked in. I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have relied on what they said without checking with you. I just figured, like always, you'd say yes, but I realized I've gotten too comfortable being prioritized without responsibility. I looked at her, a little surprised that the admission came from someone who rarely backed down. My mom exhaled, her voice softening. I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted you two to be close. I was wrong not to ask, but I was afraid you'd say no if I did, so you chose to force it. She didn't answer, but her eyes dropped to the floor, fingers spinning her wedding ring. A gesture she only did when flustered. My dad broke the tension, speaking in a tone lower than usual. Maybe we need to rethink how this family treats one another, from Sophie moving in to how we've imposed things on you without consideration. I sat quietly. Something in me loosened. Not forgiveness, but space to breathe. I'm not rebelling, I'm protecting boundaries. The kind of boundaries I should have been taught, not ignored while silently holding this family up. My parents didn't respond, but the silence was different this time. Not cold, just listening. Sophie pressed her lips together, then pulled a printed sheet from her jacket. A list of rental listings. She slid it toward our parents. I'm going to view this place tomorrow afternoon if you two are okay helping with the deposit. My dad nodded. My mom gave a slight nod. I looked at the paper, then at my sister. If you need advice, Don't hesitate to ask, but don't expect anyone to carry you. You can start over, but you have to do it standing on your own. Sophie gave a small smile. I'm trying. Really? We stood up after more than an hour. No hugs, no tears. But when I stepped out of the cafe, the feeling behind me wasn't pressure. It was space, clear, defined space. Not so close that I couldn't breathe, but not so far that we'd lose each other forever. 3 weeks after the cafe meeting, Sophie sent a text with a photo of a small apartment in the Berry Hill neighborhood. White walls, sliding windows facing a backyard. In the picture, she stood in the middle of the living room holding a key in the air. Her face wore no makeup, just an honest smile. I signed the lease myself. Mom still helped a bit with the deposit, but this time it's in my name. Thanks for pushing me to grow up at the right moment. I stared at the message for a while before replying. Proud of you. No emojis, no exaggerated words, just one simple line, enough to signal that something real had shifted. We'd made plans to meet that Saturday. No one else was invited. Sophie picked a burger place near her new studio. No flashy decor, no photo op corners. She arrived 10 minutes early, already seated, and had ordered my favorite sandwich. I started therapy with Dr. Hartman, the one I used to call pointless and useless. I raised an eyebrow. You actually went because you did it first. I figured if someone like you needs help, then maybe I'm not immune either. Her tone was light, but her eyes said more. Not sarcasm, sincerity. We talked about school, work, her plan to cut down on social media. No one dug up the past like it needed airing. It was just something that had happened and was being handled. No comparisons, no shadows hanging between two women with the last name Hammond. As for our parents, change came slowly, but it came. My mom began calling before every holiday, no longer assuming I'd be there or play a role. At Christmas, she asked, if you don't want to do dessert, I can order something, but if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear them. I agreed to contribute, but it was my choice, not an assignment handed to me. My father didn't say much. But now his calls are brief, no longer filled with commands. Instead, they're neutral questions. How's work going these days? Do you want me to take a look at the solar contract? No pressure, no pushing. One afternoon, he came to Nashville for a business trip and called to ask if I was free for coffee. We sat at a small cafe next to his hotel. He glanced around the room, then said, when you left home, I thought it was just a rebellious phase. Now I see maybe you did something a lot of us in the family should have done earlier. I didn't answer right away. I took a sip of coffee and simply asked, did you ever feel suffocated by the role you were handed? He didn't look at me, just rested his hand on the table and nodded slightly. I didn't need further explanation. As for me, I returned to my daily rhythm, but with something steadier beneath it. Not the old kind of patience, but a clear understanding of limits. Every time the phone rings and I don't pick up, it's no longer avoidance. It's because I'm busy prioritizing myself. Every time my mom asks, is there anything you can help with? Instead of saying, take care of this for me, I feel a little lighter. The personal limits I set didn't tear the family apart. They just rewrote a pattern of interaction that once made me feel like I couldn't breathe. Those interpersonal spaces didn't build walls, they drew lines, so each person knows where to stop before crossing into someone else's idea of home. One afternoon, I stood at my apartment door, hand on the lock, feeling almost unfamiliar with the peace inside me. No one waiting behind it, no suitcase by the door, no voice message asking me to sacrifice one more time. Victoria's story is a clear reminder that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary to protect self-worth and mutual respect. She didn't walk away from her family, she forced them to learn how to speak instead of impose. When Victoria stopped being the one who endures, she created a new space where relationships are built on choice, clarity, and maturity. Sometimes real love begins with a well-timed no,